So it's 1 o'clock on the nose. I think we should get started here. Thank you for taking time out of your busy lives schedules to join us for today's exciting webinar. For students, teachers, and parents alike, my name is Ryan McClure, Managing Director at 2MC Digital, and I'll be your moderator today. So first, a few quick housekeeping items. Please make sure you're muted and your video is off. The chat box is disabled except for chats directly to the moderator. Please use the Q&A tab that you'll find to suggest questions for the speakers. And if you do see a question that you'd like to ask as well, please make sure to just like it, and those questions will be voted up. Also, just FYI, this webinar is being recorded. So, please also be ready to take a few quick notes. That's with your phone, with a note-taking app, or a pencil and a paper, the old-fashioned way. This will help you participate in the webinar more fully. And at the end, there will be a survey. Please take the time to answer a few quick questions when we're done. So without further ado, I'd like to bring forward Board Director Alvin Hu to introduce our speaker today.
Thanks very much, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here. Mahatma Gandhi said, quote, "Live as if you were to die tomorrow. Learn as if you were to live forever." Hello, welcome to our SIS webinar today, entitled Strategic Learning, a Holistic Approach to Studying. You know, at SIS, we are always looking for ways to make our students better learners. Our use of 3 of the world's best curricula, Singapore, Cambridge, IB, makes us unique, not just in Indonesia, but the world. At SIS, our teachers not only teach, but they mentor and walk alongside our learners as they strive forward in a VUCA world, a world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we firmly believe that ultimate success comes when students, teachers, and parents work effectively as a triangle to ensure that learning that takes place at school continues at home. Hello, my name is Alvin Hu, and as Board Director of SIS Group of Schools, I have the immense pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Robert Kamei, who is our special guest and speaker today and a good friend here in Singapore. You should know that Dr. Robert Kamei's courses are among the most popular elective courses at the National University of Singapore. This is a top 10 ranked global university. As professor at NUS's Yong Lin School of Medicine and at Duke-NUS Medical School, he teaches 2 undergrad courses at NUS on the learning sciences and cognitive biases, reaching thousands of students. He has devoted his career to helping all students, not just medical students, learn optimally. A pediatrician by training, he has first-hand knowledge that students must be healthy to learn at their best. And as an American who holds an undergraduate degree from Stanford University and a medical degree from University of California, San Francisco, Dr. Kamei has worked and lived in Asia for the last 16 years, and he was in fact a senior Fulbright scholar in Indonesia in 2000. He moved to Singapore in 2006 to help start the famous Duke-NUS Medical School. And in 2014, he was recipient of the Outstanding Educator in Residence Award given by the Singapore Ministry of Education. He also served as Associate Provost and Founding Director of the Institute of Application of Learning, Science, and Educational Technology, ALSET for short, at the NUS from July 2016 to 2019. And you should know ALSET focuses on the rigorous study of education best practices in the classroom. And today, he will share with us his unique perspective as an educator and physician and provide strategic approach to learning that will benefit all students looking to optimize their learning. His extensive experience helped him identify a wide variety of reasons why they were not able to learn properly. In fact, many learners are thrown off because they hold certain myths that result in poor studying habits. And he will share with us today that learners who understand the truth behind these myths can actually use this knowledge to better plan their study and have an advantage over others that don't. That is why he wrote and published a book called Strategic Learning, a Holistic Approach to Studying, to give more students a chance to learn how to optimize their learning. Bob, I want to thank you so much for being with us today, and more importantly, for your generosity to share snippets of the wisdom that you've written in your book. And I'm sure we will learn a lot from today's webinar, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alvin. You know, it's a great pleasure. I've been hearing about the CIS schools for many years now, so I'm especially excited to give the webinar today. And of course, one of my favorite things is to be able to talk to young students, especially in high school. So those of you who are out there attending, a special welcome from me. So what I hope to be able to do today is to be able to share with you some of the things that we cover in our class at NUS. It's a whole semester long, so we're not going to be able to cover. We'll only cover a little bits of it, but I hope you get a little bit of the flavor of what sorts of things that we teach our students. Some added instructions. Please feel free to chat with us as we go. It's a little bit hard for me to read the chats and talk at the same time, but what my teaching assistant from NUS, Mr. Chung Wei Hang, is actually here, and he can help with answering some of the questions or refer them to me to either answer at the end of or even during. So, and then as you heard, if you have a piece of paper or a smart device to keep some notes, I'm going to ask you to do that a little bit later. So be prepared for that. So one of the things we're going to do during this presentation is get your opinion on some things. And the first, so just as a test with the Zoom, we're going to do a practice poll, just asking you what you feel. And the first question is, what do you think of this presentation so far? I especially like the feedback in this this poll. So
we're at 55, 56%.
Okay, good. Because on my screen it says 0 still. So thank you. So just to kind of get used to this, we're going to start out with an easy question.
Okay, we're at 70%. I'm going to close it off now. Okay,
a few more, and then I promise you there'll be easy questions to answer, and and sometimes there's no right answer, but the more you participate, the more you're going to get out of this. Okay, so more than half thought I'm doing an awesome job so far. Thank you very much. We're going to continue. So the first real poll is this. Okay, so let's pretend you had two books. One, a brand new book, and the other book, the same content, the same pictures, everything the same, but a little bit roughed up. In fact, very roughed up. If you were to have to choose which book to study from, which would you choose, A or B? So this is the first poll. So let me know what you think.
All right. We're at 65%. And we're going to peak out here at 73%. So I'm going to end the poll,
Okay.
share the
I
results.
really encourage all of you to answer. Okay, most people would choose A. I think that's the obvious thing is you choose the book that's easiest to read. And in fact, if you were to have bought a book that was beat up, let's say you ordered it online, and it was all beat up, you'd probably be pissed that it would be hard to read. Well, this has actually been studied several times. One latest paper came out of Princeton in the United States, where they looked at how hard it was to read some of these books and how well you were able to understand. And surprisingly, I think surprisingly, if you had to struggle a bit with reading it, then you actually learn that content better. And this actually, this kind of research actually resulted in some educators from Australia actually creating a font that's hard to read, because they thought, okay, this might be really interesting as an educational tool. Now it ends up not working so well, and we could talk about the reasons why it didn't work out so well. But the first thing that it seems this all should reflect as you think about this is that we don't naturally always recognize when we're learning effectively. So there's multiple different studies on multiple different types of strategies. And it seems like in general, we don't really recognize when it's good learning. And so the first big idea I wanted to give you is that optimal learning is often counterintuitive. It doesn't always make sense. And the only reason why we know this is because some of these things have been studied. Okay, but it does lead to a general principle that I wanted to give you. This idea leads to a principle that learning should be appropriately difficult, not too hard, not too easy. And if you're doing that, then the brain's processes the information at a deeper level, and you will remember it much longer. It's, as we'll call it, more durable. So what I tell the students is easy in, easy out. If it's easy to learn, then it's one of the first things that you'll forget. So sometimes we think, oh, some of these things we see on YouTube. I love YouTube. I use YouTube all the time. But sometimes we think that when we're able to sit and watch a lesson like watching TV, those are the best learning experiences. For instance, when we do the class, the students have to participate in the class in these polls. So they're actively participating in what they're learning about. And that's the best learning. You'll actually learn better than just sitting back and just listening and watching TV. Even though we think if it's fun and entertaining, that's the best learning, it actually may not be the most durable. And so what actually is the best types of learning is this sort of Goldilocks type of learning, where Goldilocks, you know, I don't know, some people don't know this fairy tale when Goldilocks went into a forest in the house of the bears and had tried some porridge and found some of it too hot and too cold and ate the one that was just right, okay? So in a sense, the best learning is just hard enough, just right. So I want to then now go into another way that your brain works that actually can fool you in terms of your learning. So we already saw an instance where what sort of made sense that, oh, which is the right book to learn from? It's surprising that the evidence is the harder the read book, it's better. I'll give you another example of something that the brain does to interfere with the way you learn. Okay, and we call it the animal farm activity. So in this one, we're going to ask you again to participate. So please try to do your best. In fact, I'm going to compare your results to the results of our students at NUS, just to have a little friendly competition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flash some animal photos with you, and I'm just going to ask you to remember them. Okay, don't take notes, don't cheating, no cheating, there's no reason to cheat on this, but just try to remember the animals that you see. Okay, so is everyone all ready for this? Okay, let me just get the, so here we begin. Okay, that's the end. Thank you very much. Okay. So we're going to come back to that activity. So try to keep that in your head for now. In the class, we teach what I call the holistic learning framework. And this actually covers the entire content of the course in one slide. Okay. And this framework describes an approach, not a cookie cutter, this is how you do it, but an approach to learning and studying better. Okay, and so on the top of this framework is what we call a metacognitive cycle, and it's a cycle that keeps going around and around for the rest of your life. Okay, we start out with planning. We teach them how to plan, and around planning is goal setting. Now, we know almost everyone sets goals, but very few people actually use goals successfully to be able to help them learn better or do anything better. Goals are notoriously people hold for just a short period of time, get frustrated and give them up. So there are ways to make goals really work for you and successful. So we go over that with the students. And then what we have to do is we need to teach them strategies to achieve those goals, okay? And those strategies, as I mentioned, sometimes are counterintuitive because the things that we think make for good learning aren't always for good learning. So we have to teach our students the different learning strategies to be able to accomplish their learning goals. And then we finish the cognitive cycle, this metacognitive cycle. Metacognitive means thinking about thinking. So this whole idea of thinking about thinking, there's a cycle about how you think about thinking. And so after you plan and you have your strategies, then you implement those strategies. And then at the end, at some point, usually end of semester or term or whatever, you evaluate how it went, how did it go? And then you make the adjustments on your plan. And this is something, as I say, successful strategic learners will do for the rest of their lives. Sometimes informally, sometimes just only in a few minutes, but they do this for their entire lives. But the other thing, and then Alvin mentioned this, I'm a pediatrician, right? So I know that without no matter what strategies we teach students, without the solid foundation for learning, they can't be successful learners. So there's two major foundations of learning. One is self-regulation and mindset. So self-regulation is the self-discipline to be able to regulate yourself to get out of bed and going to study. So there's issues in self-regulation around motivation and procrastination, like everyone procrastinates. There's resilience and grit to come back when something doesn't quite work out like you think it will. And there's this thing called the growth mindset, where you have to really feel like you can achieve. The other major foundation is around health and wellness. And we'll get back to this, but this is especially important for our students. And it's something that really you can imagine is something that's very important for pediatricians to be able to talk about as well. Okay, so in this webinar, it's a short 1 hour talk. I'm going to just mainly focus on just touching on elements of the metacognitive cycle. And so we're not going to be able to do much of anything else, but you'll get a little bit, again, of the flavor of what we do in the class. So, and what we'll try to concentrate today on a few learning strategies that people can use to study with. Now, we base the teaching of our learning strategies on the work done by a man in German in 1885 called, his name was Hermann Ebbinghaus. And what he did was, when everyone else at the time was trying to do experiments about memory, how you learn things and memorize things, he was very interesting, and he took the approach of how people forget things. Okay, so what he did was he used himself as the subject, and he systematically memorized non-set strings of letters, and then try to remember them and try to write them down afterwards. And he recorded how quickly he forgot those things that he was memorizing. So so he created what's called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And forgetting curves start with the act of encoding. Now, encoding is the term, the psychological term, where when you first read something or see something or hear something or feel or whatever you do, that and that your memory is, you're memorizing it, you're learning it. That act of taking that sensation and then bringing it in your brain is called encoding. So what he saw, of course, and we all know this, is after you learn something, then you pretty rapidly forget it. That's normal. Okay, that happens to everyone. But the other things that he was able to do then is he was able to show that there's things that you could do that affects that encoding. There's things that you could do to make that memory more durable. And actually, there's another concept where after you started to forget things, you could reset that memory and be able to remember things better. And so we teach our students about the learning strategies based on these three elements, these three features of the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. So just to give you an example here, after you encode, I already mentioned, and we know that you forget. And what are the things that you can do to actually flatten that curve out? So there's things that you can do before you encode, actually before you do any sort of encoding. You could do it in preparation for that learning. And there's things you can do after you encode that you go on to also help flatten out that curve. And we give our students a variety of strategies that come in either before or after the encoding. So let's give you an example of one. And to be able to show you this one, really understand it, I'm going to give you another activity, another test. And this is a test of your focus. And I'm again going to compare you to our NUS students. So, and some of you have actually done this test before. It's a pretty popular test. So for those of you who have participated, please don't share any hints about the test. And when I ask you to poll, you don't answer the poll, okay? Just kind of remain silent on those. But if it's the first time you've seen this test, then I really want you to be able to answer the questions as best as you can, okay? And please try to do it. It's really fun. Okay, so here's what we're gonna ask you to do is I wanna have you watch this basketball video. And there's two teams. What we want you to do is concentrate very closely on the white players, the players wearing the white shorts, and count how many times they pass the ball to each other, okay? So pretty simple. The white team, how many times do they pass the ball to each other? Okay, here we go.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
Okay. Very good.
Count how many.
Okay. So we're going to take your poll. And again, remind you, if you've seen this test before, you don't have to answer this, but we want those to be able to choose from the white team, how many passes did people make?
Dr. Kamei, we have 150 answers. That's 56% of participants. We're at 60%.
Okay, as long as they keep coming in, just go ahead.
Okay, seems to be peaking out at 64%.
Okay, let's take a look at the answers then.
Closing the poll and sharing results.
Okay, let's see if I could see here. Most of the results are around 15 to 16, and that is correct. I don't know why the other people did only just one or two, but the white team did pass, in fact, the ball 16 times. About half of you saw that. Okay, that's very good. So let's close that out. Okay, so now the other question I want to ask you, then again, for the people who saw this for the first time, did you guys see the gorilla?
We're at about 61, 62% complete.
How many percent did we have on the other poll?
I believe it's 65%.
Okay, so when we get up to about 65, then
Yeah, I think we're tapped out right now too at 65. So would you like me to end now?
yeah, let's take a look and see what people came up with.
All right.
Okay, so half of the people, slightly less than half of people saw the gorilla and the rest didn't. For the ones who said no, you're probably saying, what gorilla? Okay, so this is about the average. About half of the people who see this exercise for the first time do not see the gorilla. Okay, so let me show you what happened. Okay, here we go.
Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected.
Okay, so so half of you were probably really shocked that there was a gorilla, and it is the same video that I showed in both the first time and then rewinding. Just curious, for the people, this is for everyone now, not just the people who haven't seen this before. Did you see the person leave? For everyone, so yes or no? So even the people who didn't vote on the first time about the gorilla, I'm interested in seeing, did you see the person leave? So we should get more than this 65% on this.
Okay, we're at 67%, 68, 69, 70%. Got 72%. And it seems to kind
Be
of peak.
peeking out. Okay, thanks, Ryan. Let's take a look at the answer. Okay, still about half of who saw it. And there was actually one more thing that you may or may not have seen, is that curtain in the background that also changed colors. So there are a lot of things that changed while you were watching the basketball game. Okay, so what's the point of this? Okay, so the point of this is that if I started the episode by telling you to look out for the gorilla, probably 100% of you would have seen it. And if you think about, I asked you to concentrate on the video and how you miss something as big as a gorilla walking through the scene. If you think about sitting in a lecture and trying to listen to the teacher, and you can imagine how easy it is for you to miss the gorilla. That the most important lesson that we're trying to share may have walked right by you and you would have missed it. So the question is, what else are you missing during a lecture? And how many times have you gone into a lecture and said, and you leave it saying, you know what, I can't remember a single thing that I heard, okay? So the point is with this exercise is that your brain, a second big idea that I wanted to share with you, is that your brain is not a video recorder. This is what we think how the brain works. We think that the brain works as a video recorder. We're recording that lecture, it's going into our head, and then at some point we place rewind and watch it again, and that's how we access memory for it. But in fact, the brain doesn't work like that at all. The brain, when it's taking in input and learning something, it's processing it. It's filtering out things that it thinks isn't important. So it didn't see the gorilla because your brain, and half the people, your brain actually filtered out the gorilla because it didn't think it was important. It actually interprets things, it adds things, it not only subtracts things, but it adds things, it processes, it makes assumption, it fills in, and it does things, it's like an edited movie rather than video camera. It looks like a full feature film that's in your head. So with that in mind, that the brain is not a video recorder, are there ways that you can use this concept to be able to learn better? And in fact, there are a lot of people who use this principle to be able to improve their learning, because what they do in preparation for that coding is very, very important. Okay, so as I said, if I was able to tell, or if the teacher was able to tell you that watch out for the gorilla, then the students may be more likely to be able to access that. There's other things that we can do before encoding. So I sometimes suggest to the students that maybe they should go to the required reading and not read it, because we know that students generally don't do that. They won't read the reading before the lecture. They think that's crazy, I'm just going in. But again, if you go in like you're going to watch a YouTube video or something else where you've not prepared, you're just watching the video, you're likely to miss the gorilla. Okay, so what I suggest to the students, and it doesn't have to be long, it's just flip through the reading, or look at the headings of the reading, or look at the outline of the reading, or look at the questions that sometimes at the back chapter of it, and skim the chapter so that they know what at least the author thought were the important questions. And you're preparing for the encoding event. You're starting to understand what is it that you need to know, that you need to get out of the lecture, and you'll be so much better off. And I think this is especially true for students who have English as a second language, because they're so focused on understanding the English, they're going to miss a lot of things else that's going on at them. They're going to miss a lot of different gorillas. So what you can do in encoding can make a huge difference in terms of what you get out of the encoding process. For instance, we just had a lecture in class at NUS from one of the sleep researchers, and he was saying that, you know, because if you're sleep deprived, you're missing out on, you're falling into micro sleep. You're falling asleep all the time, and you may just, you're going to be filtering out a lot. So just even preparing for a lecture by being rested is an important thing. Okay, so not only can you do things before you have the encoding event, which usually happens in a classroom, there's lots of things that you can do after the encoding event, which flatten out the curve. And those are very powerful. But, and in fact, this whole idea of can you process when you're learning things, can you process it and help you memorize things and flatten out the curve is especially powerful. It's the way that, do you know about these memory championships, these memory competitions where you're like memorizing a phone book? They're doing that because the techniques, learning techniques they do after the encoding event. They attach it to other memories that they have, and they're able to memorize just tremendous amounts of information because they have a strategy. I'll also digress for a little bit. Sometimes we have a memory test that we give our students, and there's usually one or two in a class of like 500, one or two that have memorized, have learned everything, can memorize everything, know all of the things that we've asked them to memorize in class. And when we ask them, well, how do you do that? They all have a strategy. They all have a technique that they use to do it. So, and these things are accessible by everyone. It's not like they're special brain or they're super smart or whatever, but in fact, it's just learning a strategy, learning a technique that's helping them. So they are able to learn how to flatten the curve. Okay. I also mentioned one of the very other sort of very special features of Ebbinghaus' forgetting curve is he discovered is when you encode something and then you forget it. As you forget it, and as you've almost forgotten everything, in fact, your memory typically goes away very quickly. So when it starts to go away, if you reintroduce that thought, that memory, then what happens is you then, what I call reset the curve. It goes back up so that you actually will know it much better because you've let it fade away and then you've reset it. And then when you reset the curve, you could do a lot of different things. You could do a lot of different strategies to reset the curve. But just by giving it some time to let your memory go away and then using different strategies to reset the curve, you can flatten out the curve just resetting the curve flattens it out. And then there's a lot of other techniques you could do after resetting that makes you remember things much longer. Okay, so this whole forgetting curve is a useful way to think through some of the learning strategies that we teach our students in class. Okay, so in case you thought I forgot, we're going to go back now to the Animal Farm Part 2 activity. Okay, so to do this, then I need you to pull out your piece of paper or pencil paper, or your phone where you could take notes and write down. So I want you to write down all the animals that you remembered from that first video. Okay, again, no discussion. If you're there with a bunch of other people, don't try and share. We really want you to do it as an individual activity, but I'll give you a couple of minutes to try to write down the names of all the animals you saw in that first video that I showed at the very beginning of this webinar. Okay, so give you a couple minutes. I'll give you another 30 seconds to try and get those last few animals written down. They'll test your brain power here. Okay, is everyone done? Everyone done? Okay, let's just see how you did, okay? Okay, so what you're gonna do now is I wanna, before we grade it, we'll grade these, so you'll be able to have a chance to see the answers, but I want you to put your answers aside. So if you have it on your phone, turn the phone upside down or put a piece of paper, put it off to the side so you can't see it. I don't want you to see your answers that you wrote down, okay? So this is now fresh. So you're no more memory of that first video. Okay. So the second part of this activity, animal farm activity, is I'm going to show you another video. And in this video, there's going to be the videos that I previously showed you, plus some additional animals. Okay. So again, you're going to see animals that I showed in the first video. And then there are going to be extra animals that will appear in this video. I just want you to count the number of new animals. Okay, you don't have to remember which one, what their name, or figure it out or anything like that and write it down. I just want you to count how many. Whenever you see a new animal, put up a finger and we'll record how many new animals shortly. Okay, does that make sense? So really easy. So Animal Farm Experiment 2. Okay, that's the end. Okay, so I'm going to ask you now to answer on Zoom. How many new animals did you see in that second video that you didn't see in the first video? Okay, so we're going to do the open up the pool now. Thanks, Ryan.
As we pass the 60% mark, Dr. Kamei, I just want to let you know that we're getting a lot of poll responses on Facebook.
Oh,
which we can't.
Thank you out there in Facebook. Thank you.
Yeah, we can't collate those, but
how do they do that?
They're just chatting on the Facebook Live.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I'm glad I'm saying don't share your answers, because I'm not watching Facebook Live, but those of you out there, don't cheating. Okay, sharing your answers. But yeah, thank you for participating. Okay, so how are we doing? Are we
We're at
getting
66% now?
Okay, come on, you guys. You could up it a little bit. You can go a little bit more.
We're not budging. Oh, we got two more. 67%.
Okay. I hope the rest of you are there, out there watching this. Okay. So should we share the answer?
Let's do it.
Okay. Okay, so 28% said 5, and 20% 4, and 16% 6. Okay, so this is pretty close to what we see, although I have to say that our NUS students do a little bit better than you all. But let's talk a little bit about what this means, okay? So I know you're going like, what is this all leading to? Okay. Oh, okay. So before we do that, before we talk about what it's all leading to, let's go back and grade your list that you wrote down, okay, in that first video. Okay, let's go back and grade that. So on the next slide, you're going to actually see all of the animals that I showed. Tell me which ones you were able to successfully write down that you recall. Okay. So here is the full 15 animals, and write down the number of ones you got correct. I'll give you a minute. Okay, another 10 seconds, and then we'll have you report in what you able to recall. So, okay, let's move on. Okay, so I already went through this. Let's go ahead and open up the poll. How many animals from the first video did you note down correctly? Okay, and this is the number that you could recall after seeing them. And I did at the beginning of the session and went through my talk and didn't ask you right away, because I wanted to see how long, give you some time and give you really a bit of a memory challenge. So I'm not really expecting you to have all 15, although sometimes, a couple of times our students knew all 15, but I want you to go ahead. So, so don't worry if you didn't get all 15. Oh, Ryan, this has 0, 1 to 10. Okay, well, if you did more than 10, just mark 10. Okay, I think it should be fine.
We're at 62%. 163.
Then when we get all the answers, I'll explain what just happened. I'll debrief you on what happened.
Okay, Dr. Kamei, I think we're
Okay,
oh,
let's
we're
take a
getting-
look.
Okay, here we go.
What are the answers?
Sharing results.
Okay, so we had a lot of people who got 10 and above. So that's pretty good. Most people got around 8, and that's actually pretty good. Typically, the average, okay, so thank you. Let's close that. Let's go forward. So let's debrief. Okay, so of the people, let's go back to that question with how many new animals, okay? About what we typically see, and again, we saw it this time, about 90% of the group, maybe your group is a little bit less than that, but about 90% of you recognize that there are 5 plus or minus 1 animals added in the second video. Okay, so they either got 4, 5, and 6. There are, and so what, to be able to tell me how many new animals were added, just think about this. To be able to tell me how many new animals were added in the second video, what had to happen? You had to have in your head all 15 of the animals in your head to be able to recognize how many new ones. And people are really pretty accurate at that. And you showed about 90% were able to identify plus or minus 1, 5 animals were added. Okay, and you have to understand that I showed you the images of these animals only 2 seconds, each one, 2 seconds, maybe 3 seconds. And in that short amount of time, and almost a half an hour of my talk later, most people had in their head all 15 animals after only a few seconds. Amazing, right? However, when we ask you about how many you can recall in your memories, the average for our NUS class is around 7 or 8. You guys seem to have done really quite well, but what is a consistent finding, it's never the same that you could recognize, that you can have in your head. You can never quite recall as much as it had in your head. And so I teach the students, there is a difference between what you can recognize and what you recall. And in our usual educational system, when teachers test you, it's about recalling, not about recognition. Sometimes it's about recognition, but usually what they are testing you for is about recall, and that's different. But it feels the same, okay, which I'll get back to. Now, so there's a psychologist in the UK his name is Richard Wiseman. And he did a kind of very public experiment where he had 2 of his research assistants over a long weekend. He showed them 10,000 images. I have no idea where he got those 10,000 images, but he showed them 10,000 images. And what was remarkable is after seeing the first 612, they recognized an average of 98% of them. Okay, so maybe a little better than you all, but just an incredibly high number. And after 10,000, they were able to recognize 65% of them that they had seen. So, and that's 10,000 over 3 days. That's a remarkable performance. But as it turns out, most these research assistants weren't extraordinary memorizers. They're regular people. And it turns out that our brain is programmed this way. Now, for those of you who've not read the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, it's a great book. I highly recommend it. And if you read it, if you've read it, you may have remembered a little section in his book where he talks about the evolutionary advantage of people being able to keep memories of images in their head for long periods of time after only a few seconds. And he said that evolutionarily, it was an advantage to humans to be able to remember that, oh, that plant down there, I can eat it, or that plant down there is poisonous, or that animal that's I see in the distance, that is something that is good to eat, or that animal is something that's going to eat me. So having that instant recognition had some evolutionary advantage. And this is before, obviously before Google image search or any sort of written language. So the brain, so early man required this sort of processing, and Harari made that postulated that actually evolutionarily it was really important for humans. So we are most likely evolutionarily programmed to do exactly what you just did, is remember images very quickly in a short period of time. Okay. So the way this impacts learning is that we can easily recognize things, but we think what we can recognize, we can recall. We are constantly fooled as to what we can really recall and what we can only recognize. And so when you see this on the right, where people, students have highlighted, like the entire page, how many of you do that? Do any of you do that? Well, when you do that, you're just marking, essentially, you're just marking that you've seen it, that you probably can recognize it. Or the other major way that students a strategy that students tend to learn from, and I recommend not doing it, this is this read, reread. So they read it once and then they go back to it another time and they read it again. And then maybe for the test, they'll read it again. That's actually not a very good learning strategy because it tends to reinforce the recognition rather than the recall. So one of the things that is a surprise to our students is they think that memory should be thought of as short-term versus long-term memory, that things are in short-term for a period of time, and then when you study them, it goes into long-term memory where you know them for the rest of your life. That maybe works for a research scientist studying memory, but for most students, that's, to me, not a very good way of thinking about remembering things. A better way is whether or not you could recognize it or you can recall it, because both are in long-term storage, right? So if I ask you in a week from now about those images, you'll probably remember them. But what matters for in an exam is whether or not you recall. And there's one really good learning strategy that helps you recognize the difference between recognition and recall, but I'm not going to share it with you right now. So what we do tell our students is rereading and highlighting everything is not a great learning strategy, okay? So, so let me return back to the framework. And we've been spending time just sort of introducing some of the basic concepts behind this metacognitive cycle. And I mentioned already metacognition means thinking about thinking. And it turns out there are lots of studies which establish this idea of thinking about how you're learning, and thinking about how the different strategies that you use. Just thinking about it, even a little bit, helps a lot. Okay, so there's a lot of research. One of my colleagues at NUS, her name is Patricia Chen, she did this experiment where she took a large college statistics course, and she broke up the course into two halves. One half of the students got to choose, they offered different resources to study for the exam, and they were able to choose these different resources. They had to explain to the researchers why they chose that particular resource to study, and how they would actually use them and implement them. And they made a detailed study plan. In other words, they found a way to be able to implement those resources in their studies, okay? So what happened was those students significantly did better on their exams. They felt a lot more positive about what their knowledge is before the exam. And they actually, by doing this, they found that they were actually better utilized the resources that they chose to be able to study this. And here's some of a chart taken from her study. And you could see two groups. The one group is the control group, which is the white rectangle. And then the treatment group is the group that actually got these additional, just a small little tutoring about use of studying and resources, made them think about thinking. So they're in the dark bars, and you could see, and on the side is their grade. You could see that they did significantly better with their grades by this just very brief intervention. Okay. And again, this is not just the only study that's shown this. There's been other studies that looks at how different use of different resources and a small intervention about thinking and being strategic actually does help students. What's interesting is besides, there's a lot of these studies, but most students don't actually know how to think about their learning, don't think about it, even though it's been shown to make a difference. So the last big idea that I wanted to give you for this talk was that if you are a strategic learner, and there's a lot of ways that you could be tactical with the resources that you have, if you think about it, it's been shown to make a difference, and in a lot of different ways, not only in terms of performance, but how you feel about your learning. So this is just the very top of that framework. As I said, we didn't talk so much about implementation phase and evaluation phase. Both of those parts are actually big barriers for most students. It's not just creating a plan, but implementing and evaluating is a problem. So I may try and talk about this if I still have time at the end of this. But we go through the whole cycle so that students are successful with the cycle and learn. And so what they ending up doing with our class is they have a plan of what they're doing before the encoding event, even if it's a 5-second look through of the pre-reading or scanning an outline or something of the material. And we give them strategies that they can do after encoding. Teachers do this a lot where they'll give homework. Homework is getting that information and making students apply that to answer a problem. So that's a great way. Homework is actually a great way to flatten out the curve. Okay, if you're just trying to memorize things, you're going to forget it. It's going to be that green curve. But the things that you can do, the different techniques that you can do to flatten the curve actually extends and make the learning that students do more durable. Okay, and then we're not going to have time to talk about how to reset the curve, but this is again very powerful technique because you're not really doing that much more work, but you're making big gains in terms of your duration of your memory and how much you remember. Okay, now going back to the framework though, as I mentioned, we talked mostly about today's session, mostly about the metacognitive cycle and just some different aspects of that that we cover in the class. But we didn't have a chance to talk about the pillars, the self-regulation, how to deal with motivation, how to increase your motivation to learn, how to deal with procrastination, all that issues around those, as well as health and well-being. And because so the framework, all aspects of the framework we cover in class, and they all impact on learning. But do you want to guess which, I should probably have gotten a little poll here, but do you want to guess, just think to yourself, what the students believe is the biggest impact on their learning of this? And we've started to look at this and study this. But what they generally conclude, which I am in full agreement with, is that students generally are terrible sleepers. And I don't know how many of you out there do this, but they're up all night, like on social media, their friends are watching movies, Netflix, whatever, and they're not sleeping a regular sleep. And so students out there, you're going to have to believe your parents on this one when they tell you to go to bed. It's actually good for you because it does make a major impact on their learning. And some of the scientists at NUS have been studying the sleep cycle of our NUS students and see how they're learning. And it's clear the students that have a disrupted sleep schedule, that they're up late at night and then having to get up early to attend class, their grades are significantly worse. So establishing a good sleep-wake cycle when you're as young as possible is one of the best ways to get a really good, healthy night of sleep. It affects not only learning, but it affects, as I know as a pediatrician, it affects your health as well. Okay, so this is the very short preview of the course. I obviously cannot give you the entire course. As I mentioned, it's over a semester, and we take our students through this, and they actually develop a learning plan that accompanies the other courses that they're taking at NUS. As Alvin mentioned, I did write the book so that more people can have access to this material, because I'm so passionate about the material. I feel it helps students so much, and that for the most part, and I work with medical students, but all types of students as well. And even the medical students, who are among the best students anywhere in the world, they still don't know this material. So they still feel like they benefit from learning this material. So I know that you all out there at CIS will too benefit from this. But not everyone's able to take the course. So we wrote the book so that more people would be able to understand the material. CIS has arranged with my publisher to give a 30% discount on the book. So it's sounding a little bit like an infomercial. Sorry about that. But I do really want as many people who are interested in the subject to be able to have access to this kind of scientific methods to learning better. Okay. And then there's other ways to learn more. During the summer for pre-university students are going to go to university in the United States or UK or wherever, in Singapore or wherever. We're going to set up a short session for students to help them be better prepared to do the academic work in university. So we're working out the details with my university to be able to offer that to students outside the school. So if you're interested, you can send me a note, strategiclearn.kamei@gmail, and we'll put you on a mailing list. And so when those details are out, we can notify you and see if you're interested in coming. The other thing that I have is I launched a web page to accompany the book, but we have blog posts about learning. Some of them written by many of them written by our students in our course who really got turned on by the information, wanted to share what they've learned and what they do around learning and goal setting and health and wellness. So you can check the webpage out, strategiclearn.org, for more information. And here's Wang, my TA, put a little blurb together on the webpage for you to see. So you can go to that resource and you can get some additional information about learning. And then finally, I'll talk about, for those of you who haven't got enough, has too much time, you can go, I do an Instagram, Robert K. Kamei. And in that Instagram, I do posts on different aspects of learning. Every month, it's a different topic. This month is actually on learning from home. I finally decided to do it. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to be in home forever. So I better really talk about the difficulties it takes to learn and how do you overcome some of the difficulties it takes to learn from home. So that's this current month's posts on Instagram. So please follow me if that sounds interesting to you. So let me summarize what I covered then over this last hour. The first big idea was that optimal learning is often counterintuitive. Okay, so just as we sort of learn to walk, we learn to walk ourselves. It's no big deal, right? It's just we learn to learn. And we think that learning to learn is the same way. We just learn and that's it. There's nothing to learn about. We just intrinsically understand what's the best way for us to learn. And it ends up being false. Ends up being a myth. And instead, what I'm saying is that you have to depend on an understanding of the science of learning to really understand what's the optimal way to learn. Now, I have a little bit more to add to that, which I'll do at the very end, but at the last point. But if the only way that you know how to learn better is to work harder, then you're incredibly disadvantaged. And that's what I see for most of our students, that they just try to work harder and longer, and they don't know these other strategies to learn better, and so they're disadvantaged. Okay, big point number 2. I just lost it. Hold on, let me see if I can get back to this. Sorry. It crashed. Okay, so the second point is that your brain is not a video recorder. So it's not like you record it in your head and you replay it to get the answers. But the brain does make a lot of changes. It modifies and it connects new information. It does some processing behind the scenes. And if you know this and understand this, it can help you remember things better. And you could catalyze that, use that as a catalyst to be able to have tremendous memory. Some people really use it to, as they say, memorize phone books, right? But it's not that they do it not by having it in their head and then replaying it and reading the phone book again, but they have actual techniques that the brain uses to process the information that you're learning as you're learning it or shortly after to make it stick and make it accessible for them for long periods of time. And the last point is that there's lots of evidence that being strategic around your learning makes sense and it helps. And you have to figure out, though, what works for you, because what works for you isn't always the same thing as it works for your friend. Okay, you have to test it out. You don't know. There's no way to know ahead of time how a particular strategy is going to work for you unless you test it out. And then knowing that strategy isn't enough. You have to be able to know how to implement it. And that's the things that we're able to cover in a course or in the book that we aren't able to do in a little bit of webinar. But it really needs to be personalized to the demands that you have and the resources and constraints that you have personally. So thanks so much for allowing me to share some of the exciting things around learning that at least I'm excited about. I hope that you found it interesting and some of it at least applicable to the ways that you're studying or the ways that you're helping other learners learn. Thanks for attending. And now I think it's the time to ask me any questions, right? Okay, back to you, Ryan.
Dr. Kamei, thanks so much for that enriching talk. And I know from, personally speaking, I've really enjoyed the book. A lot of tools that you can literally pick up and use, the next day. So it's a bit of a challenge here, parsing all of these questions. We've got a lot of questions.
I see that. Thank you very much. That's great, but it does make it a challenge for Ryan.
That's okay. I think I've got, in some cases in order that they came in, but I've got 5 or 6 here, and I hope we have enough time. So I'll get right to it. First question I want to share with you is people learn differently. So how do you make learning just hard enough? As you mentioned in the beginning, a bit of a challenge is good. How do you make learning just hard enough in a class or even your lecture theater for a number of students listening to you? Okay, so that's a teacher question. Sounds like a teacher question. So there are modern techniques teaching that people use to be able to deal with that. Okay, so for example, one of the major advantages of the flipped classroom, and I'll mention that 15 years ago when I came to Singapore and we started this medical school in Singapore, we flipped the classroom. And at that point, YouTube was just coming out at that point. So we were among the first universities or medical schools in the world that was using a flipped classroom where you had a chance to, students had a chance to actually learn the material before they came into class. And then in class, we weren't lecturing, we didn't give a lecture to our students. We actually made them use the material that they learned and apply that to questions that the faculty can help them process, okay? And so we did this. Duke in the United States thought we were crazy, and they were a little bit upset that we would do this, but it worked so well that eventually Duke in the United States made the change to do this kind of teaching, okay? So the advantage of this kind of teaching is that the students have a chance to work at their own pace, whatever they can do to be able to learn the material, and then they come in prepared. And then when they're in prepared, then you get a chance to work with the students around thinking around it, not trying to deliver information to them. So if you do it that way, then you work out a lot of the things that are hard for students or hard for teachers to manage, is that all these students are learning this information at different paces. And they can do that offline, and teachers can monitor how they are, how the students are learning that material initially. And then in the classroom, it's really
I thought was fun, at least the medical students thought it was fun, because they actually were learning all these facts, biochemistry facts, and they're going like, why am I learning all these things? And then in class, we were giving them clinical problems that they had to use. They had to use that knowledge to apply to. And then they thought, okay, oh my gosh, that's why I'm learning this. And that's more fun because it's more real. I'm going to be dealing with this. So it becomes really relevant to the students, which is the other thing. So you need to, we've had teachers try this and do this successfully, even as low as secondary school. It's more of a kind of a little bit higher level type of classroom that would really need to be able to do that. And there's a lot of tricks about making sure students are responsibly doing the preparation ahead of time because they're not used to it. But that's just one way that you could try to deal with this personalization thing that really is the best types of learning or teaching type of experiences for students. Okay.
So it sounds like if you have instructed students on how to, say, for example, if they've read your book and they have some tools they can use for self-study, then a way to approach the personalization in the classroom is to kind of model that Socratic method where they prepare in their own way, but they discuss in the class.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a really great way of summarizing how you start to think about, okay, how do you best personalize things for a student? Because the model where a teacher is going to be able to work with each student individually, that doesn't happen. That's too hard. Right. The other thing that we did at Duke-NUS and the medical school is we had our students work in teams. Okay. And half their grade was their team score. So they had to work within their team. We actually coached them how to be a good team member. So, but you can imagine that students learn a lot from each other. So an individual student that's lagging behind, they were able to be helped by other students in their group. Now, initially, the students said, well, I'm wasting my time teaching my colleague who doesn't understand it very well. But what the best students really started to realize is when they have to try to explain it to the other students, they learned it even better. It's this principle of teaching is to learn twice. Right? Where they had to teach it, they had to distill it down in their own minds to be able to teach it. So they actually benefited from there. That was initially, they didn't get that concept, but they did eventually after they realized that, oh yeah, when I'm helping my teammate, I'm helping myself because we have a team score, but I'm also helping myself because I'm learning it better to be able to teach it to other people. So again, there's a lot of different techniques that you can use from a pedagogical standpoint to capture this difficult principle that not everyone learns at the same pace, right? And the kids who get left behind tend to get more and more left behind, and they never have a chance to catch up. There's another principle too I wanted to mention here, is that the smartest kids naturally keep getting smarter because the mind is able to connect a new memory with things that are already in your head. So if you have a lot of things in your head, if you're the smartest kid in the class and you learn more things, then you have a lot more things to connect to and you're going to be able to learn easier. It's almost not fair, right? So the way to get at this is that kids who want to learn and be as efficient learning as the top kids and the students have a lot of homework that they have to do. They have to commit to learning, to get up to speed, to be able to get all the different types of ideas and knowledge that other learning can come on to as well. So again, it's this idea of you're able to allow students to self-learn, to be able to learn at their own pace, but be able to keep inspiring them to keep learning. They have a chance then to get to the place where they're efficiently learning like the other students in class. Okay, so another reason to try to personalize this learning.
Great stuff. Thanks for that. We've got, I think at least, I hope we can get through about 5 or 6 more of these.
Okay, I'll try and keep them shorter. My answer shorter.
Oh, it's great stuff though. The next one, we talked about personalization and we talked about how teachers can formulate some strategies if they know that their students have some tools. But we get a lot of questions about motivation. So I kind of synthesized these into, like, we had motivation or lack thereof impacts learning, obviously. But is this motivation tied to memory? People who
Yeah.
don't have the tools can't remember, and then they're not motivated.
Yeah, because if they're not motivated, not showing up to be able to learn well. Okay, so motivation is a very tough thing to be able to help people with, because I call it a garbage bag term. It's like time management, motivation, or lack of motivation. What they are is they're a description of something that happens that there's a zillion different reasons for. Okay, so for instance, just the other day at the lecture by our sleep researcher, he says, if you're not getting sleep, how do you get motivated? Because you're tired. How do you get motivated to learn? So that's just one aspect of motivation. The other major issue of motivation for our students, our high school students, is you guys are growing up. And when growing up means is you losing the major extrinsic motivation that you have to learn. And that is one of your parents telling you, hey, Johnny, did you do your homework? Okay. So as you get older, as you get to college, certainly, there's not a parent there telling you to study or go to bed on time or whatever. And so you have to grow up and mature to the point where you do that it's called intrinsic motivation. Okay, so motivation is a combination of both intrinsic and extrinsic. Extrinsic motivation is like you get paid to do something, or you get grades or something that makes you feel good, that comes from the outside of you to get you to be motivated. Okay, so you have to you've made a huge loss in external motivation by your parents not being there, even if the kids hate it. Okay, it's still there. Okay, and then making the switch to internal motivation. Okay. But the other major problem with motivation and training and helping students about motivation problems, and we do spend a lot of time helping them with the idea of motivation, is so the first major problem is there's a lot of reasons why someone's not motivated. Okay, and you have to get to the root cause of that motivational issue to be able to really understand. So for instance, if you're not learning things that are connected to your goals, it's going to be hard to motivate yourself. Right? So do you really have a sense of what your goals are? And have you connected that whatever you're learning to that goal? So that's one area of issue of motivation. The other really hard part with motivation is we have in our mind this model. Sorry, I'm going so long on this answer. But the other model that we have in motivation is that we somehow have to hit some threshold of being motivated. Then we could do the study work to be successful. Okay, we have to hit that place, and then we'll then be able to study. Okay, the problem with that model is your motivation goes like this all the time. Sometimes you're super motivated. I don't know, maybe you had a good night's sleep, or you saw someone, you talked to someone inspiring, and you're motivated to learn. Okay, and other times it's like you just had broke up with your girlfriend or boyfriend, or something else happens, and your motivation to do anything is low. You somehow have to figure out how to get the study done, even if your motivation doesn't hit that peak. Okay. And so, like, for instance, the major way that we help our students with that motivation piece, even if they don't want it, even if they don't suck it up to be able to do it themselves, even if they can't do that, you can develop particular routines or habits that gets you to do the things that maybe you wouldn't ordinarily do. And there's a whole science behind establishing your routine, establishing your habit. And in fact, one of our students in the class now is writing a blog on this very topic. We hope to have it out on the blog in a few days. But yeah, there are what's complicated about motivation is that it's complicated, and it's hard to coach. And again, that goes for giving students an approach to learning. I can't give you a canned, this is what you have to do, 1, 2, 3, and then all of a sudden you'll be a great learner, or this magic pill that you do, and all of a sudden you can be a great learner. You're going to have to be the world's expert in learning your learning, and that takes time. But you need an approach to being able to do that.
Well, like you said, and another thing that popped in the reading of the book is that metacognition, thinking about how you're thinking is such a key that unlocks a lot of potential strategies that, rote memorization, all the things I learned growing up. I never thought once about how I was going to absorb things. So
I was the same way.
not getting this kind of instruction. So that's why our course is so popular, is that people sort of think, wow, you know what? No one ever taught me this stuff. I was supposed to learn by myself, and I ended up not really learning it. So surprisingly, we thought that, oh, most of the students in the class will be in the first year. Actually, we have students, they're constantly saying, Professor Kamei, can I get into your course? You're oversubscribed. Can I get into your course? This is my last quarter at NUS. I didn't get this material. I didn't understand. I know that's important for my lifetime. This is my last chance to get the course. And so can you let me in? And I said, unfortunately, we're at our Zoom limit. And so you'll have to read the book. I'm sorry. But you can imagine that students really all of a sudden, have learn the perception. Oh yeah, I should be knowing something a little bit more about learning. I shouldn't just leave it haphazard. And in fact, the students who are doing the best students, they've figured out a way to be strategic without the book, right? They've the best students have come to this same sort of principles, like that easy in, easy out principle. They've figured it out, and they know I got to push through, and I've got to really work on this. Even though I want to just sit and just look at the book, I'm going to actually do problem sets. So they've figured out how to do that and discipline themselves to be able to do it. And therefore, that's why they've become some of the best students. It's not always because they're smarter, way smarter than anyone else, but they have a strategy.
They're cunning.
Cunning, those students.
So I've got another one here along the same lines, but different. One of the things I took away from the book that was validating that I did already do is exercise. It's always been a part of my life since high school, and not just one extra thing you should do, but it's actually part of that framework. Taking care of your body, your physical health, and exercise is a part of that. What would you say to people that they feel they just don't have the time to exercise?
All right, so thank you. And Ryan, I have to say thank you for actually reading. I know that you actually read the book. So it's oftentimes you get interviewed and the person really didn't read the book, and I know that you read it. So thank you very much for actually taking the time to do that. So if I can address this, because I forgot to talk about it, but it is a really important point. The model that we have in our heads is the more work that we do, the more that we work, the more we'll learn and the better grades that we'll have. So if we're not getting good grades, it's because we're not working hard enough, okay? And so I came to this realization from one of my colleagues at Duke. And my colleague at Duke is a very famous sports psychologist. He is a psychologist for a lot of the Olympic athletes that from the United States. And we were having a conversation, and he said, Bob, the hardest part, what I have to do more than anything else that this, as a sports psychologist, is not to motivate these people to work harder. They're already motivated to do that. But I have to try to get them not to overtrain, okay? And so, because they want to do more. And so I'm going to approach your answer to your question in two ways. One is that we have students who would actually doing too much, and they're not efficient with the way they learn. So for instance, taking breaks, and especially around exercise, is a great way of taking a break. You actually end up learning more by goofing off more, having the social time. Some people just really get lonely, and they just get hard to motivate themselves if they're so lonely. And if they just spend a little bit of time with their friends, they would be able to study more. Now, I'm not saying—
Do video games count?
What's that?
Do video games count? I'm just looking at the questions people are asking.
Yeah, you know what? Any sort of break that you have is helpful. And so when I suggest for video games during our breaks, is because a couple of things. One is because it helps people from getting too distracted of doing the video games during their study habits, because they say, okay, I'm going to concentrate just during my break, and you plan your breaks. So you say, I'm going to have a 10-minute break here. I'm going to take that break and do that. Okay. So that helps them regulate not doing it when they're in studying. So that's helpful to take their mind and get them to relax. That's also good. And you end up coming back to your studying being more efficient. Now, you don't want to spend all your time doing video games because you're not going to learn. So that's the major thing. But for exercise, exercise seems to have a lot of different advantages, not only as a break, but the health advantages of exercises. And you started, or Alvin started the talk by saying, yeah, I realized that as a pediatrician, the kids who are not healthy were not learning. They weren't doing well in school. You see this. So overall health and well-being, in addition to proper sleep and exercise and diet, will help you learn better, be more motivated to learn. Okay.
Thanks for that. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Ryan, that's a good question that's come up, and I think we kind of around this. The question that comes, Dr. Kamei, is what do you think about the practice of parents sending the children to after-school tutoring to help them do better at school?
Right. Yeah, I get asked that a lot. And it's hard for parents not to do that when they see every other kids doing it. And so I understand that. Actually, one of my friends runs the PISA analysis, where they look at schools in many, many different countries. And Andreas, who's head of PISA, has told me, his research looking at performance of students with this after-school tutoring is that it doesn't really help them as much as, helps them very little. Okay. And so if you think about the cost of doing that, not in terms of monetary costs, but the cost from doing the exercise that you just mentioned, Ryan, playing with friends, getting the social interactions that are necessary to develop other types of intelligence. Okay, there's the book knowledge and whatever, but there's other types of intelligence that also really make a huge difference in how successful you are, just in terms of relating to other people and being able to communicate and be able to work as a team. All these things are what we call 21st century skills, because we know that they're really important, and it's hard to do that, develop those skills, if you're spending all your time in a classroom getting tutored. Okay, so that's one thing. I understand, though, the pressures it is for parents to feel like, oh, my child isn't keeping up with everyone else because they have all this special tutoring. For those students who elect not to do the tutoring, there's a lot of reasons to do that, not to get tutored. And as I said, the advantages of tutoring is probably not as great as people believe, but I think at the very least, if you're not going to go do the tutoring, you should have a strategic approach to learning. You should be able to take optimal advantage of the time that you are in school and learning, and be able to then plan out your evenings or whatever time you have devoted to study, and be able to do that. So a lot of times what these tutoring things allow you to do is it helps provide a structure so that students actually learn some of these skills of how to learn. Okay, you don't have to go to tutoring to be able to learn those skills, although that's how most of the students in Asia do that. And I think that students and parents who are spending lots and lots of money getting their students tutored, just spend a little bit of that and make sure that they understand these concepts, if not from me, from someone else who knows how students actually learn. Okay.
Great. Thanks very much, Dr. Kamei.
So I've also got a few more here, but to your point, Dr. Kamei, maybe the one solution would be to exercise at strategic times and play video games while you're doing it.
Yes, that's very efficient. The other thing too that I talk a little bit about is that, and I'll use myself as an example. Around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, around now, is getting to me my low point of the day. And I know that I'm just not as efficient with, when I'm writing the book, I know that this is not a good time for me to write the book, because words just really slowly get out onto the computer at this point. And it's a better time to just kind of take a break, get some exercise, rejuvenate, get ready, and then I'm ready to do other things later on in the day. So that I try to be strategic about my natural body rhythm, about what naturally happens. And we know that the physiology of the body changes so that at certain parts of the day, you're more alert, more active than others. And so the late afternoon is a good time for me to get some exercise, because frankly, I'm not really all that efficient with my studying and my academic work then anyway. So again, trying to personalize your own body, personalize your own way you learn and you study and you work, and developing a plan and then doing it and testing it out to see if it helps. Did it work? Is something that strategic learners would do throughout their entire lives. And they have skills to be able to be successful no matter what they do, because they can learn how to be successful.
For sure. Well, that concludes the time we have for Q&A. I just want to take one more moment to make sure everyone's aware that we're going to leave this up on the CIS group website for a while, because this is a really easy way to click through and get the book if you're interested in doing that. And please, if you are at all interested in staying in touch, you can grab the LinkedIn QR code for Professor Kamei or for the CIS group of schools.
And I'd also like to say that thank you very much for hosting this webinar. As I mentioned, I've known Alvin for many, many years now, and I've heard about the schools. I'm so, I mentioned to Alvin how much how highly I thought about the curriculum and all the things that you're doing, the interest of the teachers in developing themselves and learning these kinds of skills to be able to apply to teaching. My hat's off to you all at CIS. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for their time. And if you want to share this with a friend or a student who couldn't make it, you'll be able to find it on our website. And of course, it's been live streamed on the Facebook page, so it'll remain there as well.